6 months after the incident, Thomas Mitchell stood once again in the courtyard of Buckingham Palace. But this time his role was completely different. Instead of maintaining a rigid guard position, he was teaching a group of new recruits about animal threat assessment and emergency response protocols. The key is learning to recognize unusual behavior patterns, he explained to the attentive guards. Most animals avoid humans, especially in crowded areas. When you see an animal acting erratically or aggressively, that's your first warning, sign that something might be wrong. His left arm still bore scars from the rabid dog's bite, but he had regained full use of it through months of dedicated physical therapy. The doctors had declared his recovery complete, with no lasting effects from either the physical trauma or the rabies exposure. The new training program Thomas had developed with palace security had become a model for other royal residences and government buildings around the world. Guards now received basic education about recognizing signs of rabies, understanding animal behavior, and knowing when emergency situations might require flexible responses to protocol. Remember, Thomas continued, our primary duty is always to protect people. Sometimes that might mean following standard procedures, but sometimes it might mean making quick decisions based on the specific circumstances you're facing. One of the young recruits raised his hand. Sir, what if we make the wrong decision and break protocol unnecessarily? Thomas smiled at the question, remembering his own fears and doubts from that morning 6 months ago. That's a risk we have to be willing to take when lives are at stake. It's better to act with good intentions and face consequences later than to let innocent people get hurt because you were afraid to make a decision. After the training session, Thomas walked through the palace grounds, reflecting on how much had changed since that fateful morning. The area where the attack had occurred now featured a small memorial garden dedicated to responsible pet ownership and rabies prevention, funded by donations from people around the world who had been inspired by his story. Emma Thompson and her family had become close friends, visiting him regularly during his recovery and staying in touch as he returned to active duty. Emma, now 9 years old, had developed a passionate interest in animal welfare and had started volunteering at a local animal shelter with her parents. Guard Mitchell taught me that we should always help animals and people when they need us, she had told a reporter during a follow-up interview. Even when it's scary or difficult, we should try to do the right thing. Thomas's story had also inspired changes beyond the palace walls. Military academies began incorporating ethical decision-making scenarios into their training programs, using his experience as an example of when breaking rules might be morally justified. Veterinary schools started teaching about the intersection between animal welfare and public safety, emphasizing how quickly trained individuals could recognize and respond to disease threats. Animal control departments improved their emergency response protocols, and public awareness campaigns about rabies prevention reached millions of people worldwide. The media attention had eventually died down, but Thomas still occasionally received letters from people who had been moved by his story. Parents wrote to thank him for demonstrating the importance of protecting children. Military personnel shared their own stories about times when they had to choose between following orders and following their conscience. One letter that particularly touched him came from a young veterinarian in Australia who had been inspired to volunteer with rabies prevention programs in rural communities. Your story reminded me why I became a vet in the first place, she wrote. Sometimes we get so caught up in procedures and protocols that we forget our real purpose is to help and protect living beings. Thomas had also reconnected with his original passion for veterinary medicine. In addition to his duties as a guard and trainer, he had begun volunteering at London animal shelters during his off-duty hours. His military discipline combined with his gentle approach to animals made him particularly effective at helping rehabilitate rescue dogs with behavioral issues. It's funny how life comes full circle, he told his girlfriend Sarah during one of their evening walks through Hyde Park. They had met during his recovery when she was working as a nurse at the hospital. Her compassionate care and understanding had helped him through the most difficult period of his rehabilitation. You mean becoming a soldier made you a better veterinarian? And being a veterinarian made you a better soldier? She asked, squeezing his hand gently. Something like that, Thomas replied with a smile. I think I finally understand that all the different parts of who I am don't have to be separate. They can work together to help me serve others better. On the first anniversary of the incident, a special ceremony was held at Buckingham Palace to formally dedicate the memorial garden. Emma Thompson, now a confident and articulate young girl, was invited to help plant the final roses in the garden, alongside Thomas. "I still think about that scary morning sometimes," Emma admitted as they worked together in the soil. "But mostly I remember how brave you were, and how you didn't let anything stop you from helping me." "You know what I think about?" Thomas asked her. "I think about how many other people might be helped because of what happened that day. All the guards who are learning better ways to protect people, all the families who are learning about keeping their pets healthy, all the children who are learning to be careful around strange animals." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "So even something really scary can turn into something good?" "Often the best things come from the most challenging situations," Thomas agreed. "When we face difficult choices and decide to do what's right instead of what's easy, good things usually follow." The ceremony concluded with remarks from Colonel Harrison, who had become one of Thomas's strongest supporters within the military hierarchy. Guard Mitchell's actions that day reminded all of us that true service means being willing to put others before ourselves, even when it requires personal sacrifice, the colonel told the assembled crowd. "The protocols and procedures we follow are important, but they exist to serve a higher purpose. When we lose sight of that purpose, we risk becoming robots instead of human beings." Thomas Mitchell showed us how to be both disciplined soldiers and compassionate people. As the sun set over London that evening, Thomas stood at his familiar post near the palace entrance, once again wearing his red tunic and tall bearskin hat. But now his role was enhanced by his experiences and expanded training. He was not just a ceremonial guard, but also a teacher, a protector, and a bridge between military discipline and human compassion. Tourists still gathered to take photos and marvel at the stoic soldiers, but Thomas knew that beneath their impressive uniforms, each guard was now better prepared to respond to unexpected situations with both courage and wisdom. The rabid dog incident had lasted only a few minutes, but its impact would continue for years to come. Thomas had learned that sometimes the most important moments in life are the ones that force us to choose between safety and service, between following rules and following our hearts. As he stood at attention, watching over the people who came to admire the palace, Thomas Mitchell knew that he had found his true calling. He was exactly where he belonged, doing exactly what he was meant to do, serving others with both strength and compassion. The little girl he had saved was now growing up, confident and kind, inspired to help others just as he had helped her. The guards who learned from his training would be better prepared to protect the people in their care. And somewhere in the world, other individuals facing difficult choices might remember his story and find the courage to do what was right instead of what was expected. In the end, Thomas realized the greatest honor was not the medal from the Queen or the recognition from his superiors. It was the knowledge that when faced with an impossible choice, he had chosen love over fear, action over inaction, and service over self-preservation. That decision had not only saved one life, but had touched countless others in ways he was still discovering. The news of Thomas's commendation spread as quickly as the original story had. Media outlets that had been prepared to cover a story about military discipline and protocol violations suddenly found themselves reporting on royal recognition for heroism instead. The narrative shifted from Guard Breaks Protocol to Queen Honors Hero Guard. Over the next few days, as Thomas recovered in the hospital and received his rabies treatments, letters and gifts poured in from around the world. Children sent him drawings of brave soldiers protecting people from dangerous animals. Adults wrote heartfelt letters thanking him for proving that compassion and quick thinking could triumph over rigid rules. Emma Thompson and her family visited him on his third day in the hospital. The little girl had made him a card with crayons, featuring a stick figure guard with a red coat standing next to a smiling little girl. "Thank you for saving me," she had written in careful block letters, with her mother's help. "You were very brave," Emma told him solemnly as she handed him the card. "Mummy says you got hurt because you helped me. Does it hurt very much?" Thomas smiled despite the pain in his arm. "It hurts a little, but it's getting better every day, and seeing you safe and happy makes it worth it." Emma's parents struggled to find adequate words to express their gratitude. "We've been thinking about what we can do to thank you," her father said. "We know there's nothing that can truly repay what you did, but we want to help somehow." "Seeing Emma healthy and safe is all the thanks I need," Thomas replied honestly. "Just promise me you'll always be careful around strange animals, okay, Emma?" The little girl nodded seriously and crossed her heart with her finger. "I promise. Mummy taught me about rabies and why that doggy was sick. I'll never pet strange dogs again without asking a grown-up first." As his recovery progressed, Thomas learned more about the broader impact of his actions. The incident had sparked conversations about when it was appropriate to break rules for moral reasons. Military academies around the world began using his story as a case study in ethical decision-making under pressure. Dr. Mitchell, who had been overseeing his medical treatment, shared some encouraging news during one of her daily visits. "Your rabies tests continue to come back negative," she reported. "The post-exposure treatment appears to be working perfectly. You should make a full recovery with no lasting effects from the virus exposure." The physical therapy for his arm was more challenging. The dog's bite had caused significant damage to muscles and tendons, requiring weeks of careful rehabilitation. Thomas worked with physiotherapists daily, slowly regaining strength and mobility in his injured limb. During his recovery, he received another unexpected visitor. James Robertson, his fellow guard who had been on duty that morning, came to see him with a mixture of admiration and guilt written across his face. "I've been thinking about that morning over and over," James confided. "I saw you trying to get my attention, but I ignored you because I thought you were just being distracted by something unimportant. If I had looked where you were looking, maybe I would have seen the dog too." Thomas shook his head. "You were following protocol, just like we were trained to do. There's no way you could have known what was happening. Don't blame yourself for doing exactly what you were supposed to do." "But that's just it," James continued. "You showed all of us that sometimes doing what we're supposed to do isn't the same as doing what's right. You made a choice that I'm not sure I would have been brave enough to make." Their conversation was interrupted by Colonel Harrison, who had come for his daily check on Thomas's progress. The colonel had been surprisingly supportive throughout the ordeal, helping to navigate the military bureaucracy and ensure that Thomas's actions were properly recognized rather than punished. "Mitchell, I have some news that might interest you," the colonel announced. "The palace security team has been conducting a full review of their protocols in light of this incident. They want to implement new training procedures that include animal threat assessment, and they've specifically requested that you help develop the program once you've recovered." Thomas was intrigued by the opportunity. "What would that involve, sir?" "They want guards to receive basic training in recognizing signs of rabies and other animal diseases," the colonel explained. "Your veterinary background makes you the perfect person to teach other guards what to look for and how to respond appropriately." The idea of combining his military service with his animal expertise appealed to Thomas greatly. He had always regretted leaving veterinary work behind when he joined the guards, but now it seemed like fate was offering him a way to use both skill sets. As his hospital stay drew to a close, Thomas reflected on how dramatically his life had changed in just a few minutes. His split-second decision to break protocol had not only saved Emma's life, but had also opened up new possibilities for his own future. The media attention had been overwhelming at times, but it had also brought attention to important issues like rabies prevention and the need for flexible thinking in emergency situations. Animal welfare organizations had used his story to promote vaccination programs and responsible pet ownership. On his final day in the hospital, Thomas received one more surprise visitor. Sir William Ashworth returned, this time carrying an ornate wooden box bearing the royal seal. "Guard Mitchell," Sir William said formally, "Her Majesty has asked me to present you with this personal token of her appreciation for your service." Inside the box was a beautiful silver medal engraved with the royal coat of arms and the inscription, "For exceptional courage and selfless service to the people of Britain." It wasn't an official military decoration, but rather a personal gift from the Queen herself. Her Majesty wanted you to know that your actions that day exemplified the very best qualities of those who serve the crown, Sir William explained. Courage, compassion, and the wisdom to put human welfare above personal considerations. As Thomas prepared to leave the hospital and begin the next phase of his recovery, he knew that his life as a royal guard would never be quite the same. But he also knew that he had discovered something important about himself and about the true meaning of service to others. The ambulance arrived within minutes, its sirens wailing through the London streets as paramedics rushed to treat Thomas's wounds. His left arm was badly torn, with deep puncture wounds that would require surgery and months of recovery. But the immediate concern was the rabies exposure, which could prove fatal if not treated quickly. We need to get you to the hospital immediately, the lead paramedic explained as she cleaned his wounds. Rabies post-exposure treatment must begin within hours of contact to be effective. You'll need a series of shots over the next several weeks. Thomas nodded, understanding the seriousness of his situation better than most people would. During his veterinary training, he had learned about the horrific progression of rabies in humans. Without treatment, the virus would slowly destroy his nervous system, causing hallucinations, paralysis, and eventually death. Even with treatment, there was still a small risk that the virus might take hold. As the paramedics prepared to transport him to the hospital, Colonel Harrison approached the ambulance. His weathered face was stern, but Thomas could see concern in his eyes as well. The colonel had served in the military for 30 years and had never faced a situation quite like this. Mitchell, the colonel said quietly, you know what you've done here today breaks every rule in the book. Breaking protocol while on guard duty is a serious offense that could result in court-martial and dismissal from service. Thomas met his commanding officer's gaze without flinching. Despite the pain and the medication making him drowsy, his voice was clear and steady. Yes, sir. I understand the consequences of my actions. I accept full responsibility. However, the colonel continued, his tone softening slightly. What you did was also incredibly brave. You saved that child's life and prevented what could have been a mass casualty situation. The royal family has been informed of the incident, and they specifically requested that I express their gratitude for your heroic actions. The ambulance doors closed, and Thomas was whisked away to St. Mary's Hospital, where a team of doctors and specialists was already waiting. The news of the incident had spread quickly through London's medical community, and everyone wanted to ensure that the hero guard received the best possible care. Back at the palace, the aftermath of the incident continued to unfold. The area where the attack occurred was cordoned off, while veterinary experts examined the rabid dog's body and tested it for the virus. Security footage was reviewed to identify anyone who might have come into contact with the animal's saliva. Emma Thompson and her family were among the first to be examined by medical professionals. Although Emma herself hadn't been bitten, doctors wanted to ensure that no saliva had gotten onto any cuts or scratches she might have had. Her parents were overwhelmed with gratitude and relief, struggling to process how close they had come to losing their daughter. That guard saved her life, Emma's father told reporters who had gathered outside the hospital. He threw away his career to protect our little girl. We can never repay him for what he did. Emma herself, too young to fully understand the danger she had been in, kept asking when she could see the nice soldier again to thank him properly. Her mother had tried to explain what happened, but 8-year-old minds have difficulty grasping concepts like rabies and life-threatening situations. Meanwhile, social media exploded with videos and photos of the incident. Tourists who had witnessed the attack shared their footage online, and within hours, Thomas's story was trending worldwide. Royal Guard hero became one of the top hashtags on multiple platforms as people shared their admiration for his selfless actions. News outlets from around the globe picked up the story, with headlines praising the guard who broke centuries of tradition to save a child's life. Television crews stationed themselves outside the palace and the hospital, hoping to get interviews with anyone connected to the incident. At the hospital, Thomas underwent immediate surgery to repair the damage to his arm. The dog's teeth had severed several tendons and caused significant muscle damage. Surgeons worked for 3 hours to clean the wounds thoroughly and repair what they could, knowing that any remaining traces of the rabies virus could prove fatal. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the infectious disease specialist overseeing his treatment, explained the post-exposure protocol to Thomas as he recovered from surgery. You'll need a series of rabies immune globulin injections around the wound sites, followed by 4 doses of rabies vaccine over the next 2 weeks. The good news is that when started promptly, this treatment is nearly 100% effective. Thomas nodded, relieved to hear that his chances of survival were good, but he was more concerned about the potential consequences of his actions. Breaking protocol while on guard duty was not just against regulations, it was considered a betrayal of the sacred trust placed in royal guards. That evening, as Thomas rested in his hospital bed with his arm heavily bandaged, he received an unexpected visitor. Colonel Harrison entered the room, followed by a distinguished older gentleman in an expensive suit whom Thomas didn't recognize. "Mitchell," the colonel said formally, "I'd like you to meet Sir William Ashworth, Private Secretary to Her Majesty, the Queen." Thomas struggled to sit up straighter, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. Meeting a member of the royal household was an honor he had never expected, especially under these circumstances. Sir William approached the bed with a warm smile. "Guard Mitchell, I'm here on behalf of Her Majesty to personally thank you for your extraordinary actions today. Your quick thinking and brave response prevented what could have been a terrible tragedy." "Thank you, sir," Thomas replied, still uncertain about what this visit might mean for his future. "I only did what anyone would have done in that situation." "I think you'll find that very few people would have made the same choice you did," Sir William said. "Breaking protocol to save a life requires not just courage, but the wisdom to know when rules must be set aside for a greater good. That kind of judgment is rare and valuable." The royal secretary pulled out an official-looking document from his briefcase. "Rather than face disciplinary action for breaking protocol, you're being recommended for a commendation for exceptional bravery. The Queen herself has requested that your actions be formally recognized." Thomas stared at the document in disbelief. Instead of the court-martial and dismissal he had expected, he was being honored for his choice to put human life above military discipline. Thomas took a deep breath and did something no royal guard had done in decades while on active duty. He broke protocol. "Rabid dog," he shouted at the top of his lungs, his voice echoing across the courtyard like a thunderclap. "Everyone get back. From the fence now." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Tourists jumped and spun around, shocked to hear one of the famously silent guards actually speak. Cameras turned toward Thomas as people tried to understand what was happening. But more importantly, Emma's mother looked up from her phone and saw the infected animal just feet away from her daughter. "Emma, come here right now," she screamed, rushing toward her child. But it was too late. The sound of Thomas's voice had startled the rabid dog, triggering its final aggressive response. The animal snarled and lunged forward, squeezing through a gap in the ornate fence that no one had noticed before. Its eyes were wild with disease and confusion as it headed straight for Emma. The little girl turned around just in time to see the foaming animal charging toward her. She screamed and tried to run, but her small legs couldn't carry her fast enough. The dog was only seconds away from reaching her when Thomas made his second life-changing decision. He abandoned his post entirely. Thomas dropped his ceremonial rifle and sprinted across the courtyard, his heavy boots pounding against the cobblestones. His tall bearskin hat flew off his head as he ran, and his red tunic flapped behind him like a cape. He had never moved so fast in his entire life. Other guards and security personnel were now responding to his shout, but they were too far away to reach Emma in time. Thomas was her only hope, and he knew he had just seconds to act before the infected animal reached her. The crowd scattered in panic as people realized what was happening. Parents grabbed their children and ran for safety, while others stood frozen in shock. Mrs. Collins tried to gather her students together while calling for help on her phone. The organized field trip had turned into chaos in a matter of seconds. Thomas reached Emma just as the rabid dog was about to bite her leg. Without hesitation, he threw himself between them, using his body as a shield. The infected animal immediately changed targets and launched itself at the guard instead. The dog's teeth sank deep into Thomas's left forearm, right through the thick fabric of his uniform. The pain was immediate and intense, but he didn't cry out. Instead, he grabbed the animal with his free hand and tried to pull it away from Emma, who had fallen backward and was crying hysterically. "Stay down, Emma," he commanded, his voice calm despite the agony shooting through his arm. "Don't move until I tell you." The rabid dog thrashed violently, its diseased brain making it impossible to control. It bit down harder, and Thomas could feel its teeth grinding against his bone. Blood soaked through his red sleeve, but he held on, determined not to let the animal reach the child. Emma's mother arrived and scooped up her daughter, carrying her to safety while sobbing with relief and terror. Other tourists continued to flee the area, though some brave souls stayed to help or record the incredible scene with their phones. Thomas knew from his veterinary training that rabid animals often tired quickly in their final stages. He just had to hold on long enough for the dog to exhaust itself or for help to arrive. But the animal seemed to have found new strength in its madness, shaking its head violently as it tried to tear flesh from his arm. Security personnel finally reached the scene, but they hesitated to act. The rabid dog was attached to Thomas, and any attempt to shoot or taser the animal might harm the guard as well. They surrounded the pair, weapons drawn, waiting for an opening. "Don't shoot," Thomas gasped, still holding onto the thrashing animal. "You might hit me and the bullet could go through and hurt someone else." Instead, he began talking to the dog in a calm, soothing voice, just as he had done with frightened animals during his veterinary training. Even though he knew the rabies had destroyed most of the animal's brain, some tiny part of him hoped that his gentle tone might reach whatever was left of its consciousness. "Easy, boy," he whispered, blood loss making him feel dizzy. "It's okay. Nobody's going to hurt you anymore. You're just sick, and it's not your fault." Amazingly, the dog's thrashing began to slow. Whether it was responding to Thomas's voice or simply running out of energy, the animal's grip on his arm started to loosen. Thomas continued talking, his voice growing weaker but remaining steady. "That's right, boy. Just let go now. You don't want to hurt anyone. You're a good dog who's just very sick." The crowd watched in stunned silence as the royal guard continued to comfort the very animal that was attacking him. Cell phone videos captured every moment of the extraordinary scene, and news crews were already rushing to the palace. Finally, the rabid dog released its grip and collapsed onto the ground, its body convulsing as the disease reached its final stages. Thomas immediately stepped back, cradling his wounded arm while security personnel quickly contained the dying animal. Paramedics rushed forward to treat Thomas's injuries, but he waved them toward the dog first. "Check if anyone else was bitten," he ordered, his training taking over even as shock began to set in. Rabies can be transmitted through any contact with saliva. Everyone who was near that animal needs to be examined immediately. As medical personnel began treating his wounds, Thomas looked around at the crowd of tourists who were staring at him with amazement and gratitude. Little Emma peeked out from behind her mother's legs and gave him a shy wave, which he returned with his uninjured hand. Colonel Harrison arrived on the scene within minutes, his face a mixture of concern and anger. Thomas had broken the most fundamental rule of being a royal guard, and there would be serious consequences. But first, they had to deal with the immediate aftermath of the incident and ensure that no one else had been exposed to the deadly virus. The rabid dog lurched forward another 5 feet, bringing it dangerously close to a group of school children who had arrived on a field trip. Their teacher, Mrs. Sarah Collins, was busy organizing them into neat lines while explaining the history of the Royal Guards. The children giggled and whispered among themselves, completely fascinated by the tall soldiers in their magnificent uniforms. 8-year-old Emma Thompson pressed her face against the cold iron bars, trying to get the best view of the guards. She had begged her parents for weeks to bring her to see the palace, and today was finally the day. Her blonde pigtails bounced as she jumped up and down with excitement, pointing at Thomas and the other guards. "Mummy, why don't they ever move?" she asked her mother, who was busy taking photos with her phone. "They're very special soldiers, darling," her mother replied without looking up. "They're trained to protect the Queen by staying perfectly still, no matter what happens around them." Emma nodded seriously, impressed by their dedication. She had never seen anyone stand so perfectly still for so long. It must take incredible strength and discipline, she thought to herself. She decided she would try to stand like them when she got home. Meanwhile, Thomas watched the infected animal stumble closer to the innocent family. His veterinary knowledge told him exactly what would happen next. The virus had reached the final stage, where the animal would become increasingly aggressive and likely to attack anything that moved. The dog's brain was being destroyed by the infection, leaving only primitive instincts for survival and violence. Other security personnel were stationed around the palace grounds, but they were focused on human threats and potential terrorists. None of them had noticed the small animal making its way toward the crowd. The palace's security cameras were positioned to monitor for people, not stray dogs. The morning shift change had also created a brief gap in coverage as guards rotated positions. Thomas tried to catch the eye of his fellow guard, James Robertson, who was stationed about 20 feet away. But James was staring straight ahead, following protocol perfectly. Even if James noticed Thomas's subtle attempts to get his attention, he wouldn't be allowed to respond while on duty. The rules were absolute and non-negotiable. The infected dog suddenly stopped moving and swayed on its feet. For a moment, Thomas hoped it might collapse and end the threat peacefully. But instead, the animal lifted its head and seemed to notice the crowd for the first time. Its clouded eyes focused on the movement and noise coming from beyond the fence. A low growl escaped from the dog's throat, barely audible over the chatter of tourists. But Thomas heard it clearly, and his blood ran cold. That sound meant the animal was about to enter its final, most dangerous phase. Rabid animals in this stage would attack anything they perceived as a threat, which could include any moving object or person. Little Emma had grown bored with watching the motionless guards and started exploring along the fence line. Her mother was distracted, trying to get the perfect photograph of the palace entrance. Emma wandered away from the group, following a colorful butterfly that had caught her attention. The rabid dog's head turned toward the small girl, drawn by her movement and high-pitched voice as she talked to the butterfly. The animal took an unsteady step in her direction, then another. Its growling grew louder and more menacing. Thomas felt his heart pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. Every fiber of his being wanted to scream a warning, to break from his position and protect that innocent child. But years of military training held him frozen in place. The consequences of breaking protocol while on guard duty could end his career and bring shame to the entire regiment. He thought about his commanding officer, Colonel Harrison, who had made it clear that nothing, absolutely nothing, was more important than maintaining discipline while on duty. A guard who breaks protocol endangers the entire monarchy, the colonel had said during their last briefing. Personal feelings and individual judgment have no place in this position. You follow orders, period. The dog moved closer to Emma, who was now only about 15 feet away from the fence. She was still chasing the butterfly, completely unaware of the deadly threat approaching from behind. Her mother remained focused on taking photos, occasionally glancing up to check on her daughter, but not noticing the danger. Thomas calculated his options in seconds. He could break protocol and shout a warning, which would alert everyone to the threat but also end his military career. He could try to somehow signal other security personnel, though none seemed to be paying attention to the small drama unfolding near the fence. Or he could maintain his position and hope someone else would notice the danger before it was too late. The internal struggle was tearing him apart. On one hand, he had sworn an oath to follow orders without question. His duty was to remain motionless and silent, protecting the dignity and traditions of the royal guard. Breaking that oath would betray everything he had worked for and dishonor his family's military legacy. But on the other hand, his conscience and his veterinary training told him that an innocent child was about to be attacked by a rabid animal. If he did nothing and Emma was bitten, she would likely die a horrible death unless she received immediate medical treatment. Even then, rabies had a nearly 100% fatality rate if symptoms appeared. The dog was now just 10 feet from the fence, its foam-covered mouth hanging open as it focused on Emma. The little girl had stopped chasing the butterfly and was now examining some flowers growing near the base of the fence. She was completely vulnerable and had no idea that death was approaching her. Thomas closed his eyes for a split second and made a decision that would change his life forever. Some things, he realized, were more important than following orders. Some situations required a person to choose between duty and conscience, between protocol and human life. When he opened his eyes, his face was no longer the expressionless mask of a royal guard. Instead, it showed the determination of a man who had decided to risk everything to save an innocent life. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace as guard Thomas Mitchell adjusted his red tunic for the third time. His polished boots reflected the early light, and his tall black bearskin hat sat perfectly, straight on his head. At 28 years old, Thomas had been protecting the royal family for 6 years, but today felt different somehow. A strange tension hung in the air like fog before a storm. Thomas stood at his post near the main entrance, his rifle held at the ready position. Tourists were already gathering behind the ornate iron gates, cameras clicking and phones recording every movement of the stoic guards. Children pressed their faces between the bars, hoping to catch a glimpse of the famous soldiers who never smiled, never moved, never broke their discipline no matter what happened around them. The rules were clear and had been drilled into every guard since the tradition began centuries ago. No matter what occurred during their duty, they must remain motionless and silent. Tourists often tried to make them laugh or react. Some would tell jokes, make funny faces, or even touch them inappropriately. The guards were trained to ignore everything and everyone while on duty. Their job was to protect the monarchy with dignity and unwavering focus. But Thomas had always been different from the other guards. Before joining the royal service, he had worked as a veterinarian assistant in his hometown of Manchester. His love for animals had started when he was just 5 years old and found an injured sparrow in his backyard. His mother helped him nurse it back to health, and from that moment Thomas knew he wanted to help creatures that couldn't help themselves. During his military training, fellow soldiers often joked about his gentle nature with animals. While others would shoo away the base cats and dogs, Thomas would share his lunch with them. He could calm an aggressive horse with just his voice, and had once spent an entire night helping an injured fox that had wandered onto the training grounds. His commanding officers sometimes worried that his compassion might interfere with his duties as a guard, but Thomas had always proven them wrong. The palace grounds were usually peaceful in the early morning hours. Gardeners tended to the perfectly manicured lawns and flower beds. Kitchen staff hurried back and forth preparing for the day's meals. Security personnel made their rounds, checking every corner and shadow. Everything followed a precise routine that had been perfected over generations. As Thomas stood at his post, he noticed something unusual near the east gate about 50 yards away. A small brown and white dog was wandering along the fence line, moving erratically. At first he assumed it was just another stray that had somehow gotten onto the grounds. London was full of homeless dogs, and they occasionally found their way into places they shouldn't be. But something about this dog's behavior caught his attention. It wasn't walking normally. Instead, it stumbled and weaved like it was drunk or injured. Its head hung low and white foam dripped from its mouth onto the pristine walkway. The animal seemed confused and disoriented, bumping into benches and stumbling over its own feet. Thomas's veterinary training immediately kicked in. Those symptoms could only mean one thing, and it terrified him more than any human threat he might face. The dog was displaying classic signs of rabies, a deadly virus that attacked the brain and nervous system. Rabid animals were unpredictable and extremely dangerous. They could attack without warning, and their bite could transmit the fatal disease to humans. His heart began to race, but his face remained perfectly calm and expressionless. The tourists continued taking pictures, completely unaware of the danger that was slowly approaching. Children laughed and pointed at the funny walking doggy as their parents held them up for better views. None of them realized they were watching a potential killer. The infected dog continued its unsteady journey along the fence, getting closer to where the crowds gathered. Thomas calculated the distance and trajectory. If the animal continued on its current path, it would reach the main gate area in less than 2 minutes. Once there, it could easily slip through the bars or gaps in the fence and attack innocent civilians. Standard protocol demanded that Thomas remain at his post no matter what happened. He was not allowed to speak, move, or react to any external situation while on guard duty. Other security personnel would eventually notice the threat and respond appropriately. His job was simply to stand perfectly still and maintain his position until his shift ended. But Thomas couldn't stop thinking about the veterinary cases he had witnessed during his training. He remembered the horrible death that rabies victims suffered if they didn't receive immediate treatment. The virus would slowly destroy their brain, causing hallucinations, paralysis, and eventually death. Children were especially vulnerable because they were more likely to approach and pet strange animals. The dog stumbled closer, now only 30 yards away from the tourists. Its breathing was labored and shallow. Thick saliva continued dripping from its mouth, and its eyes had a wild, unfocused look that Thomas recognized as the final stages of the disease. This animal was beyond help, and it was about to become a deadly weapon. Thomas gripped his rifle tighter, though his face showed no emotion. Sweat beaded under his heavy uniform despite the cool morning air. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to break protocol and warn the innocent people who were in danger. But 6 years of military discipline held him in place like invisible chains. The tourists continued their chatter and photography, blissfully unaware that death was approaching them one unsteady step at a time. Parents lifted children higher for better views. Elderly couples shared stories about previous visits to the palace. Teenagers took selfies with the stoic guards in the background. And through it all, Thomas Mitchell stood perfectly still, watching a nightmare unfold in slow motion while struggling with the most difficult decision of his entire life.